Yeah, as much as you can.
Good. Oh, we're now live. This feels like BBC with the live.
Great. I think we're live now, Nicole. So we can kick off, I think.
Oh, I thought that we were going to see people coming in. Okay, then let's get live for real. Welcome everybody to today's session with myself and Alistair. My name is Nicole Ostianova. I have spent the last 2 to 3 years designing and researching efficient and at the same time a robust monitoring and reporting and verification systems for especially carbon and agroforestry forest carbon projects. I have recently founded an organization called Tree Valuation, where I deepen that topic and concentrate specifically on agroforestry large-scale programs in the cocoa sector. Alistair, you want to go?
Great. Yeah, so my name is Alistair. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Silvera. Silvera is effectively a data business. We provide data on forest carbon and actually soon to be soil carbon. We provide that as an independent service, so we do not sell offsets. We only sell data about offset projects, and that will be to basically to anybody in the value chain who cares about quality, whether that's the developer themselves, whether it's an exchange or a broker, or whether it's the end buyer. And in doing so, hope to help the market develop through that extra transparency that we're providing.
The application of technology or remote sensing technology and its interpretation for forest and agriculture monitoring is a huge space. So we decided to narrow that down for the purpose of the next 18 minutes. And we will concentrate on application of technology for driving ethical carbon monitoring for generation of carbon assets, namely carbon credits. So what do we mean by ethical and ethical carbon? Well, we both believe that the space needs to work for investors who are seeking risk reduction and ensuring that the assets they're buying actually do create positive impact on the ground. But at the same time, it needs to work for those who create and generate that ecosystem services on the ground. That means land stewards, it means communities, it means farmers, and it means also businesses. We know that unfortunately today that the traditional monitoring is a limiting factor for creating a pipeline of successful forest and agroforestry carbon projects. Depending on the scale of a project, it can constitute up to 20% of the costs. That covers boots on the ground type of monitoring. It covers certification costs and carbon issuance costs. So as we see that today, it's not yet scalable. Alice, do you want to chip into that from your experience?
Yeah, definitely it's early days in the market, and especially with the data and tools. I think the 2 points I'd maybe make are that there's a kind of a disparate set of tools and standards and data sources, but nothing yet that quite meets the needs of all the stakeholders throughout this value chain that I described, that kind of gives this full transparency and is oftentimes you'll see data that's useful, but it's not particularly actionable, or it omits very important things. You have to, especially with RED projects, treat them very holistically. It's not just about carbon in the ground, it's about how the project relates to its the broader set of stakeholders and the communities especially. And yeah, I would definitely agree. The technology is now already useful, but it has some way to go. And our view is that it's better to acknowledge the weaknesses and address them than to present technology as a panacea, but it shouldn't paralyze us in introducing technology where it does work.
Yeah. Indeed, then we discussed two areas, or a specific area where the tech today is already good. That would be mostly the large-scale conservation projects, because the tech is scalable and can even create reporting and dashboarding for historic and future tree cover or forest cover changes. Where it is not that good, as what Alistair mentions, is the actual carbon estimations. We know that the accuracy we are reaching today is actually not acceptable to the market. It's somewhere between 30 to 50%. The interesting piece is that that's mostly because the boots on the ground data is either not available or not good enough, and then we see how it circles back to the landowners and the land stewards, because that monitoring is costly. And unfortunately, those who create that value on the ground are often not really rewarded for it due to the huge sector of retailers, brokers, etc., who take up the margin on credits mostly. I know, Alistair, you had a couple of anecdotal evidence or stories from your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a spread of applicability of the data. I think, yeah, completely agree. In the kind of gross deforestation tracking, the data is pretty good now, and that's part of our product offering. When, you know, if you're thinking about it through the product life cycle, you're obviously going to have some unavoidable costs in the origination phase, and especially to treat this holistic picture of how the project relates to the communities around it and the ecosystems. So that's never going to go away. But yeah, fundamentally, there's costs being spent to produce estimates of the carbon at the outset that are quite far off, and we work a lot with academic groups to improve the science, and we've been working with a group that's been re-benchmarking the UK carbon stocks, which is, you know, it's a temperate climate. The density of biomass isn't off the chart. The biodiversity isn't anything like you would see in the tropics. But the kind of benchmark allometry that people have been using to map the tree characteristics to the biomass is up to 50% out. And that's huge, and it's actually underestimating systematically, especially in mature forests, the amount of carbon. And, you know, a 50% delta in the biomass, that's huge for the developer. You know, it will completely change their project economics, and it just sets the project off on a poor footing going forward. And then those ongoing tracking costs are quite material for many projects at the moment, like genuinely material. And even then, the buyers aren't comfortable with the level of audit they're getting. The interval of time is too long. And even though, you know, the standards, they are good custodians, they have these buffering mechanisms, but it's a difficult story for a buyer who spent maybe 7, 8 figures sometimes on offsets to tell to their stakeholders when you've had some impairment event, and the buffer deduction may be 3 years away if that happens, and but they are in the press then and then, and they'd much rather have a much tighter loop between the on the ground reality and the issuance of credits. I mean, recently we were quoted as in Bloomberg as saying up to half of the projects have some issue or impairment. I mean, there's a bit of a glass half empty way of describing it. It's probably could say more than half are pretty solid. But given the data has been so poor, this is actually not surprising. It's also not surprising there's a spectrum of quality, and what is best for everybody if the higher quality projects are rewarded, and the lower quality ones the ones that have issues have the data to turn that around to manage their projects well, to achieve their fair premium, and the small percentage who might be underperforming systematically that should be transparent to the buyers in the market.
We would encourage already any questions. We would take any questions which there might be in the audience. If there are none so far, just thought to give a little bit like high level name throwing and the overview of what kind of business models around tech interpretation and forest carbon there are. And Alistair will then wrap up with what still needs to happen. So we just thought to sort of give that high level overview. So obviously what Silvera does is a specific independent carbon rating service, which is completely detached from any sales of carbon credits. So that's a unique business model. At the beginning, I remember when Silvera started, I was asking your co-founder, so how are you different from Pachama? Because back then it was not yet that so clear. But now it's clear that Pachama has also closed their funding rounds recently. But the business model is actually very much different, although the actual monitoring service is pretty much similar if we now don't go into the very, very technical details of what type of imagery is used. But basically, Pachama is providing additional assurance on credits and has created a marketplace for credits. Then we have in-field-based remote sensing technologies, which is quite an interesting hybrid between what the landowners would really need for the boots on the ground monitoring and the large-scale remote sensing technology. So there will be things like FarmTrace recently also joined the Google Award for taking in their program now. Very good at actually tree planting and actual individual tree monitoring. And then we have the huge space of providers and research institutes like Wageningen University in the Netherlands, where Satelligence comes from, or Flint Pro in Australia, who provide more like greenhouse gas flows and land cover monitoring. Also already scalable because these things are not tailored. But most of the solutions, to just cover this to round up, most of the solutions are still tailored, so not yet at the stage where they would be scalable and where would they provide benefit to the both sides of the coin, meaning cover the investor needs and cover the landowner needs. I see we have quite some questions, so let's just quickly have a look at them. Oh, maybe that's a good one for you, Alistair, the first one.
Yeah, so this is a developing area. What are the game changers that you foresee? Yeah, so for us, the reason why we know about the errors in the allometry, or the kind of more traditional ways of evaluating biomass and therefore carbon, is basically because of the new wave of research that characterizes the shape of trees and quantifies their volume and their density very, very precisely. So we're investing actually just in the next year over $2 million to go and very accurately ground truth multiple different forest biomes, doing that work alongside UCLA, NASA, JPL, and University College London. And that actually we've shown in our trial work that we can bring this error down to single digits. So for us, that's a big step. So we can bring the error down when we use earth observation. So we use that very accurate ground truthing data to squeeze the most that we possibly can out of the earth observation. But you're relying on these kind of very, very accurate calibrations and going as far as recalibrating by cutting down, drying and weighing trees to make sure that calibration and error is very, very tightly evaluated. So for us, that's and we're doing that, in collaboration with academia. We're going to publish that work, also collaborating with developers, so that they benefit from that at the outset of the project. So for us, that's us grasping the nettle and saying, look, the current technology just didn't work, so we have to spend the time and the money to make that kind of what we would hope is a game-changing step. We're actually at the moment originating a similar collaboration on soil with a couple of universities and actually talking to partners. So that's one we're really interested in. If there's any interest in the group in talking to people about piloting those technologies. So for us, it's like about pushing the science forward. I mean, the other aspect and this is actually like kind of relating to agroforestry and agricultural crops, you always have to look at the projects holistically. So actually the carbon measurement for tree crops, which was another question there, that technically is solvable, actually more so than these very dense tropical forests, because the trees are, the trees, the spacing, and they tend to be less biomass dense. But it's the kind of what if exercise, like what was there before? How does that relate to what the community's doing? What would have happened if the tree crop wasn't there? With carbon, those questions are equally as important as the measurement on the ground. I think that's something you kind of align with as well, Nicole, those broader characteristics.
I will link, there are two more questions at the moment. One is, what about tech, especially Internet of Things, coupled with research in forestry and agronomy? Could that be a key to involve small farms, small landowners, to, for example, create kits, which would include a bundle of seedling, sensors, irrigation, that can become an additional revenue for these small-scale actors? And then there is a second question, and I will bundle the two. Do you consider monetization of carbon as effective means to fighting climate change in the long run? Definitely I believe the technology needs to be primarily in the hands of who need to use it in the field, and in the forestry and agroforestry space, it would be the landowners. So definitely yes. It currently, depending on which region you are, and that's a limiting factor, because you mostly need internet access and smartphones or phones. East Africa looks very different to West Africa. My experience with West Africa is that farmers' phone number changes as often as your shirt, more or less, because there is a prepaid service, no coverage, etc. So we're a little bit, that's still the deployment of the low-tech tech needs to be scaled, but definitely it's the case. And at the same time, monetization of carbon as a long-term solution, I don't think that that's the case. I think it's a bridging solutions for the next 10, 15 years. And also, if you look at the smallholder farmers, it is today, or the programs I'm part of are designed as, or using carbon finance as a transition to the new world and to the new way of doing agriculture and doing business. With that risk in the mind, that carbon finance is not going to be here forever. And with the new or enhanced commitments, etc., Germany coming in, those are hints that tell us that today we're not reaching the peak, but the peak will not be there for more than 15, 20 years. I don't know what your view, Alistair, is on that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that in 20 years, if there's still something called carbon finance, and it isn't just finance, then something's gone very wrong. I mean, the kind of economics argument is like, until you price those things effectively, as long as they're external, and there's a question on biodiversity as well, carbon, biodiversity, if those things never appear on a balance sheet, then they're going to be underestimated. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the current market as it is a 10-20 year transition. It's an important one to make that happen, but really, there's multiple ways that pricing can happen, whether it's carbon taxes or it's just regulation, but those things tend to happen rather slowly. So the markets are important. They're important for this medium term, absolutely.
There is a question on biodiversity, which we will park because there is a panel which will cover biodiversity monitoring tomorrow with eDNA specialist Susan. I don't remember the company now, but please look it up. Then there is a question directed to me. What measures should be taken to ensure that monetization does not distort the climate change actions? Very good one. Carbon monetization should be linked to supply chains, so that actually we're not offsetting, but we are removing carbon within existing supply chains, so that actually a company who is venturing into a carbon space is doing something in their own operations and changing the way they do business. So for me, that's like the prerequisite to do that. And there are, how much time do we have more? We have 5 minutes, I think, right? So we have 3 more questions. Alistair, do you want to take some of the last 2 ones? Double counting, which might be very close to your heart.
Yeah, look, this is a question we often get, actually, and it's not such an issue. The standards and registries actually do a pretty good job. There has been in the past some high-profile cases where some bad actors had resold credits more than once, and that ended up in the courts. But that's very much a corner case. Our view is that that's kind of it's not really an issue. The registries and the standards actually do their job there, and they seeking to replace them or displace them actually is not going to be helpful. The issue really is around the transparency of like how the projects are performing in general. The question on biodiversity. Look, there's some people doing really interesting work. Often single answers are presented as solve-alls, and that's almost never the case. You need multiple sets of data, you need multiple approaches. Some of them are messier and more manual than you would like. There are really interesting work being done with DNA being sampled in the field. Does that solve everything? Of course it doesn't. Is it really useful? Yes, of course it is. Also, having the boots on the ground, doing those surveys, tracking the evolution of landscapes remotely, also relevant. But yeah, again, there'll be more experts on the panel tomorrow, so you should probably tune in for that one if that's something you'd like to dig deep in. I mean, maybe as we're coming to the end of the session, I think Nicole alluded to this earlier. The resellers, the middlemen, have traded basically on the basis of asymmetry of information and exclusive supply and exclusive sale agreements. And it's our view that once the information is widely available through this whole value chain, the buyer can manage their own purchase strategy. They can have long-term offtake agreements bilaterally, and then they can trade in the short-term market on exchanges, very, very low spreads. And then the developers can do the same. They can get the vast majority of the value that they've created, and they can manage their own selling, the vending of their own offsets in a similar way. They'll want some security of purchase, and they'll also want to have some upside from the prices it increases, as it's very, very likely to do. And it's the data that effectively unlocks both of those sides of the market. So the more broadly that's available, the better, in our view.
I think our time is mostly up. We did not cover one question. I'm sorry for that. That relates to other issues in carbon credit generation, which is not linked to technology, but linked to land ownerships, which is a very good point, because that is another barrier for landowners and land stewards not venturing into the market. just want to wrap up. Huge potential. There is a lot already available, and from our perspective, really, the work needs to be done on accuracy, further research, and really bring the two things, both the investor perspective and the landowner perspective together, and finding integrated solutions which work at an affordable price for both, actually. Yeah. With that, thank you for the session. Thanks, Alistair, too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.